All right, we're in the book of Judges and getting toward the end of the book of Judges. We're in Judges chapter 19. I think we read this particular passage or part of it last week, but didn't have time to get into it, and so we'll just start by reading that over again. And again, as we've titled this, Examples of Personal Immorality. Last week we talked about chapter 18, issues of national immorality. Before that, the chapter before that was national idolatry, and the chapter before that was personal idolatry. And so these are, as we said, are not the chronological part of the book. That's the first 16 chapters. But these are the reasons why those first 16 chapters happened. And we can't place these particular events in any certain portion of the Judges because we're just not given that timeline and chronology, but it gives us an idea of what was going on in the nation that so angered God that he would respond the way that he did. And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. And he took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from her to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the young man saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days, so they ate and drank and lodged there. And so that's setting up for the entire chapter of the events that are going to take place from this point forward. Certain Levites staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. You remember that Micah had a priest in his house in the mountains of Ephraim. And I'm not saying this is the same guy because we don't know, and commentators are all over the place about that, but that's the one thing they do hone in on and say, well, could it be him? Well, it could have been, or it could have been another one. We simply don't know. But he took himself a concubine, and for some reason she played the harlot with him and then went back to her father's house. And then after 4 months, he finally decided to go get her. I wonder why the delay of 4 months. And I don't have the answer, so whatever your thoughts are.
I'm reading from the ESV. I haven't read the entire chapter yet. I'm not that worried with it. Can we conclude that she was sexually unfaithful to him? Or
that would be the conclusion I would draw. What do you think?
It just said that she
played the harlot. There's only kind of one inference you can get from that particular term.
ESV doesn't say that. ESV says she was unfaithful, and
okay,
which might mean that she just got tired of it.
Okay, could be, yeah. It's interesting, the difference in the words there. She was unfaithful, she played the harlot. That could be a technicality with the particular Hebrew word, which I haven't spent any time studying. But 4 whole months, maybe he was deciding whether he wanted to go get her or not. That would be a logical assumption that you would make if you had a situation like that. Possibility she was going somewhere and was going to be gone, and that's when she did this and then left, and he didn't realize she had been gone until maybe she didn't come back when she was supposed to. That could be another thing. Diana?
Did he only have one concubine?
Pardon?
Did he only have one?
It doesn't say. Okay. Diana makes a good point. Maybe if he had more one concubine, he just didn't miss her for a while. And we don't know because the text doesn't say. It just tells us that he did find this concubine, brought her home, and then these events ensue after that. Glenn?
That's a pretty good trip, too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good trip to where she went, so it's not like she spent much time doing anything else but getting back to her father's house. So, again, a lot of these, as we say so much, Pam and I were having a conversation about some biblical stuff when she got here this morning. And isn't it interesting that the more you study the Bible, the more questions you think of that you'd like to have answered? And it's just an ongoing, lifelong process of thinking about something, and then it brings up another question, and brings up another question. And sadly, like this one, there's so many of them that don't answer our personal curiosity, which I wish they did, but then if it did, I probably wouldn't want to read all that stuff because the Bible would be so large it would be unmanageable. So this gives us again, this is written to give us a glimpse into the personal immorality of Israel, and this is just one example of that. And the storyline is not, well, why did it take 4 months, or was this the Levite that was in Micah's house? The story is literally what's going to happen later in the chapter with all of this, and we'll get to that before too long. Any other thoughts or comments? Amy?
I found it interesting that the girl's father was really happy to see him.
Yeah.
Was it because that he was ready to let his girl go, or was he just happy to see him and liked him as a person? I don't know.
Again, another one of those questions that we don't have an answer for. Diana?
I guess because I read the whole story, I felt he knew that some kind of way that she shouldn't have returned.
Okay.
So he was trying to spare his daughter's life by constantly entertaining him.
Okay.
Thinking he could probably soften his heart. And of course, we'll find out later that never did happen.
Yeah.
But I thought that's the way I took it.
Okay.
He may have been like, okay, he's here, I'm going to stay in the upbeat thing. He kept trying to feeding him, and he would stay one more night, stay one more night, stay one more night. And I think he just knew that something was not going to be right.
Okay. Because what was the penalty for what she had done? If we're assuming it's harlotry, as we said, she could be stoned to death. So it's a good insight, and maybe he was trying to protect his daughter. Dave?
Well, it's just that, now that I've read through the whole chapter, it just seemed to me that the idea that she had been, if she had been sexually unfaithful to him, seemed to have nothing to do with the story.
Yeah.
Whereas, if she had just said, look, I'm going back to live with Daddy,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a travesty, but just doesn't make sense why that would be a factor.
Yeah, exactly. Here's Kevin's response, and you take it for what it's worth, because it was kind of, as I read through this 2 or 3 times, I thought, when a father married off his daughter, he paid the dowry, and, shall I say, got rid of her. And now all of a sudden she's come home, what he's going to have to do? He's going to have to take care of her. And again, this is just a thought that passed through my head. I'm not suggesting this in any way to be truth, but he made me think, I'm going to have to take care of her for the rest of her life now. I'm not going to be able to marry her off to anybody else. I don't know. Saw a hand over here. Redempta.
That's what I was thinking, that maybe he said that he can't even get her to leave.
Yeah, could be. And again, we're just speculating here. Dave?
Another thing, I always thought a concubine was like a mistress.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, the narrative says that her father was his father-in-law.
Father-in-law, yeah.
So, is there marriage here or not?
Well, technically under the law, no, she was a concubine. She wasn't a wife. And we notice in the days of Solomon, there was a distinction made between Solomon's wives and concubines. But I wonder if God made that distinction so much as maybe we do. John, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say, there's a proper order of things, and this just opens up a can of worms for her to come back, and I thought maybe that's all these.
Yeah, could be. And again, like I said, we're speculating on all this because the text doesn't tell us, and it's not the purpose of this story to give us all these details. But anyway, he comes to get her. The father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him. He stayed with him 3 days, so they ate and drank and lodged there, and everything seems to be fine. Then it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, again, there's that phrase, son-in-law, father-in-law, and yet she's still called a concubine in the text. Refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. So they sat down, and the 2 of them ate and drank together. And then the young woman's father said to the man, please be content to stay all night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. And then he arose early in the morning on the 5th day to depart, but the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until afternoon, and both of them ate. And again, here's one of those questions. Why is daddy-in-law trying to keep him around for so long? Is it back to Diana's comment of he's just trying to keep him happy and good feelings going on with this? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that question. Maybe there was some ulterior motive there that we don't know about, that's not mentioned in the text of why he wants him to stay. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servants, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, "Look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow go your way early so that you may get home." However, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he arose and departed and came opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. They were near Jebus, and the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come, please, and let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it." Now remember, Jebus is Jerusalem. When does Jerusalem become a part of the Commonwealth of Israel, so to speak? When David captured it. And so this is still foreign territory for Israel at that point in time. And so Jerusalem doesn't come into play until much later in the narrative of the Old Testament as being part of Israel, and it would remain part of Israel as long as basically Israel was in control. And of course, still the highlight of a trip to Israel, the city of Jerusalem as it stands today. But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go to Gibeah." So he said to his servant, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah." And they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go into a lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. So the first thing you notice with that is, he said, we're not going to go stay in a city of foreigners. Why might that be?
They would probably be treated better.
Okay, well, yeah, if you're reading ahead, they might have been better off to do that. But what might be his mindset at that point in time? Might not be welcomed into a city of foreigners, since we are Israelites. Or maybe he was still of the national mindset that no, we don't have anything to do with people outside our nation, so we're going to stay with our own people. Again, we don't know what the answer to that question is. So he decides we'll go in and we'll go into the lodge in Gibeah and we'll spend the night there, but nobody would take them in to spend the night. Dave?
Kevin, I'm trying to get things arranged chronologically, but wasn't there some sort of a situation between the Jebusites and the people of Israel as they were coming out of the promised
Yeah.
land? And there was a promise made to the Jebusites that they would not destroy them and run them out. So
Yeah.
I would think that there would be a good relationship.
Yeah, you would think, because God had spared them for the reason that he decided because of their actions during the entrance into Canaan for the first time. So, again, the more you think about it, the more questions you ask, and the few answers there are for those. Glenn?
It's interesting that no one would take him in, because it seemed like it was a real honor to have a Levite. That may have been my father-in-law living there.
Okay, it could be.
This was a lawless time.
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is in the later part of the chapter. We'll find out what the city is like, and when we get a little further in there. Just then an old man came in from his work in the field at evening, who was also from the mountains of Ephraim. So here's a guy from where their home is, who's now living in this particular place. He was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes and saw the travelers in the open square of the city, the old man said, "Where are you going and where do you come from?" Honest question. Strangers in the city, you say something and ask about them, and that's exactly what he did. Who are you? Where are you coming from? What brings you our way? And all those questions we ask of people that we don't know. And so he said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I'm going to the house of the Lord. But there is no one who will take me into his house, although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for myself, for your female servants, and for the young man who is with your servant, and there is no lack of anything." And so he said, we're coming from Bethlehem in Judah, toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. But then he says, I went to Bethlehem, and I'm now going to the house of the Lord. Where was that? Shiloh. So again, just raises more questions. Okay, he was going to the house of the Lord. What does it say about his spiritual state? Well, maybe something, maybe not. Maybe he was doing it because it was obligated. That was his time to do that, or whatever the case may be. We simply don't know the answer to that question. But he's going from Bethlehem up to Shiloh, and then back over east to the mountains of Ephraim, where his home is. And he said, nobody's taken us in. He said, I've got food, I've got water, I've got everything. Nobody has to do anything for us. I can take care of my people. I can take care of my servants. I can take care of my donkeys. And so, I don't know why that people aren't taking me in. And the old man said, peace be with you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys. And they washed their feet and ate and drank. And as they were enjoying themselves, suddenly certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally. That sounds familiar. Where? Sodom and Gomorrah, Job and his family. It's a repeat of that story all over again. And the phrase there, perverted men, is literally the sons of Belial. That's how it's worded in the Hebrew. And the definition of that is worthless, good for nothing, unprofitable, base, wicked. What kind of people are these? They're bad. they're bad people, and they're bring out the man who came to your house that we may know him carnally. And so this isn't just they saw the pretty girl and said, we want her. This is all about something else that they wanted. So sons of Belial, worthless, good for nothing, unprofitable, base, wicked. Belial. It's a term that has an uncertain origin. We think we kind of know what it means, and it's a pretty good indication of what it means. Deuteronomy 13, verse 24. If you hear someone in your city, which the Lord your God gives you to dwell in, saying, corrupt men, there's that word, have gone out from among you and enticed the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known, then you shall inquire, search out, and ask diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination was committed among you. And so, again, New King James translates it corrupt, but it's that Hebrew word that's properly translated the sons of Belial. And so they're mentioned all the way back in Deuteronomy chapter 13. And it's not talking about a specific person or a specific group of people per se. It's not like Levites or Gibeonites or whatever. It's a group of people known by their actions. Sons of Belial. Again, corrupt men. There's that same word that's used there. NIV says troublemakers. English Standard, worthless fellows. New American Standard, worthless men. The New Revised Standard Updated Edition. New Living Bible, the Complete Jewish Bible, calls them scoundrels. The Message says evil men. American Standard of 1901, base fellows. So you get the idea here. These weren't good people. There was nothing redeeming about them, nothing to be encouraged by them. They were bad, bad people. They're mentioned, and we're not going to look at all these, but if you'd like that list for some reason, holler at me, I can get it to you, or just search Belial on BibleGateway.com, and it'll pull up all those references for you. But they're mentioned there in Deuteronomy 13, 14, 15, 9. They're mentioned here in Judges. They're mentioned several times in 1 Samuel, a few times in 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Chronicles, once in Job, in Psalms, Proverbs, Nahum. So it almost seems like that's a phrase that denotes any truly bad, evil individual or group of people in Israel. They are called the sons of Belial. We have terms like, well, it's a bunch of thugs, or a bunch of reprobates, or a bunch of whatever other term you can think of. And so it sounds like this term is that particular idea. 1 Samuel 2 and verse 12 says, now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. And what happened to Eli's sons? Consumed by the fire. Why? Well, they took strange fire. Why was it strange? Because God had said, this is where you get the fire and use it. They got it from somewhere else, and God's anger was kindled against them. And I'm sure it wasn't just for this, but you remember they would cheat people. There was a certain order in how they took the meat that was meant for them from the sacrifices. And they, instead of waiting until the time it was boiled, they put in the fork and pulled out what they got, and that was theirs. They got there beforehand and said, we're going to take that, and that. And the people said, that's not the right way. And they basically said, what? We don't care. This is the way we're going to do it. And we're the priest. And so they did that. And so, again, it's reference to the actions and behavior and character of people rather than a particular individual. We talked about the angel of the Lord. Who was that? There is no son of Belial in that sense. Anybody could be a son of Belial. Glenn?
Is it the same as the children of the devil?
Yeah. And the phrase is not the same, but it's the same idea. The children of the devil and Belial. Most of the commentators, especially those who are really good in the Hebrew language, say it ought to be translated sons of Satan, son of the devil, or something of that nature. And so again, these are the enemies of God, the enemies of God's people, and that's how they acted in their own lives. 2 Corinthians 6 verse 15. What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? Belial is the Greek. There's the Hebrew there, and it's again, it's one of those transliterations. They substituted Greek letters for the Hebrew, and we've substituted English letters for the Greek because we're unsure of exactly what term best describes that, whether it's Satan, devil, or whatever. Apocalyptic Jewish writing exclusively uses Belial as a reference to Satan. And so the Jews looked up on it that way. And again, that's not scripture, so we can't just say that's for sure. But that's how the ancient Jews, and specifically in their apocalyptic writing, used it. James Orr in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia said there's no suggestion that it's a proper name. So it's not a son of Belial. Nobody could look at Kevin and say son of Belial. That's not how it was used. It was used of the character, of the mindset, of the actions of the people who were involved in that. All right, questions, comments, anything you want to say about that? All right. But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Again, sounds just like Job, doesn't it? And Job's house. Seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage. Why does he say that particularly? Why does he say, seeing this man has come into my house, do not commit this outrage? Bob?
He is taking personal responsibility.
Exactly. He's taking responsibility. It's his job to make sure that they're safe, they're taken care of. In fact, when the man said, I've got everything I need, he said, don't worry about that. I'll take care of everything because that's my hospitality, so to speak. And I brought them into my house now that I've got to protect them. I see another hand. John?
I think that's why he told them too, only don't stay out in the square.
Yeah. Again, we're revealing why maybe nobody took them in, because they knew what might happen. And that's why he told them, don't stay in the city square, at least come into the house. Maybe there you'll have some measure of protection from what's going on. So, again, reading sort of between the lines, we get the character of this town. And maybe not all the people were involved in this, and maybe not all of the people approved of this, but they knew what was going on, and either they couldn't do anything about it or they wouldn't do anything about it. And as a result, that's maybe why they didn't take this group of people in. Verse 24. Look, here is my virgin daughter and the man's concubine. Let me bring them out now. Humble them and do with them as you please, but to this man do not do such a vile thing. All right, daddies in the room. What's wrong with that? Everything. And everything. And again, it's hard for us to wrap our mind around the father doing this. Same thing happened, though, when the offer was made in Sodom and Gomorrah. And you look at the circumstances and how women were treated in that day and time. It makes maybe that much more sense than it would in our day for that particular time. But to offer his virgin daughter and the man's concubine, you guys do what you want with them, just flies in the face of anything we consider right or good or holy or righteous. And, I've never had a daughter, but I can tell you that wouldn't have happened until they got over my dead body. And maybe that would have happened, but that's not what happened here. Diana?
I agree with you. I wouldn't send my daughter after the number. Wouldn't be something crazy for me to do that. But I think there were laws that this particular person knew they were there upbringing.
Yeah.
But also, it was, as much as it was violent, it was more natural for a man to be with a woman than two men to be with each other.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's why he thought it was such a violent situation. However, and I won't go as far as the rest of the story, I just think it's just something that I couldn't see myself in.
Yeah, we can't even wrap our mind around it. Let's just deal with that. So we understand that. And yes, you would think two young women would be more attractive to a group of men. But what's the problem here? They're not interested in the women, are they? They're interested in the man. And that tells you, again, all the way back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Dave?
Maybe there's a twisted thinking here because it's got a Levite.
Okay.
Maybe, even today, you've got certain religions where it just, if you violate a nun, that's just particularly more hard than violating another, but just a regular woman.
Yeah.
So maybe that's got something to do with it.
Sure. Well, and I like your word there about the twisted thought process, because as we've read through Judges, we've talked about, why would Israel do that? And why did they accept that? And why did they accept that? And the reason was they had given themselves over to idolatry. They'd given themselves over to personal immorality, national immorality. And so their mindset wasn't what they had when they came into the nation about God's law. They had just kind of thrown that out the window. And yes, he was going up to the house of Shiloh, but he was a Levite. And so there's at least some connection still there with his religion. For the most part, the nation of Israel had lost their moral footing. And so for them to think of something that, there might have been other people in Israel who said, yeah, it's a good thing to try, it might have worked. And just because their mind wasn't thinking the way it should have been thinking. But the men would not heed, verse 25. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. Notice the wording of that, verse 25. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. Dave?
Yeah, ESV seems to be saying that the Levite is not making any decisions here. It's the master of the house. He's saying, you take my virgin daughter and you take his concubine. Yeah, sounds good.
Well, I'm just going by the wording New King James. So the man took his concubine. And again, why did he do that? We're asking questions we can't answer. But here's where it gets as ugly as you thought it would, and it's going to get uglier after that. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning, and when the day had begun to break, they let her go. And so they relented, took the concubine, and I'm going to leave it to your imagination what went on all night. Yes?
So when the man took his concubine, that's not the homeowner?
Well, the wording to me suggests, when it says, so the man took his concubine, if he said, so the man took the concubine, or the man of the house, that's just why I'm jumping down on that. I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened. It may have been that the house owner took her, but just that wording seems to me to indicate, yeah, he gave up his own concubine.
Or the man of the house had his own concubine?
Okay, it could be. He had his own concubine and gave her as well. Good point. Dave?
Well, it seemed like that when the Levite was ready to go, his concubine is hanging on the door, and the implication to me is she's dead.
Yeah.
He said, "Get up, let's go."
Yeah.
And so it seemed to be his concubine. Oh, not the.
Yeah. So it's and his response. Well, let's get to that. We'll get there. Then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. And when her master rose in the morning and opened the door of the house and went out to go his way, there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. So, a couple of things I noticed about this, and you tell me what you think. He opened the door and went out to go his way, and there the concubine fallen at the house of the door. Do you think he expected to find her there? Doesn't sound like it, does it? I mean, there she was. He was going out to go his way, and there she was. And so, his assumption, I'm guessing, and again, this is a guess, is that we're not going to see her again. She's gone. And that was his, but there she was. And so he said to her, "Get up and let's be going." Again, Daddy's in the room. We have, we scratch our head, we can't even wrap our minds around this thing. Get up and let's go. I mean, she's been abused all night long, and even if she was alive, which she wasn't, it doesn't seem like, you think you'd at least try to be nice to her, do something to her, help her in some way, but no. Lynn?
This may give a little insight as to why she ran away and why he waited 4 months.
You just added more layers to this than we can't answer. That's a good question or a good point. Jeannie?
That's what I was thinking. Isn't this the woman he just went?
Yeah.
And now he's doing all this.
Yeah. So he could have been a candidate for husband of the year. Not maybe in all of this. So again, and I think the only way to deal with this is laugh about it, because it's just too often to contemplate the real ugliness of what's going on here and what happened here. Diana and then John.
Well, we talked about him coming forward played it again. And the story says she played it hard. And then to save his life, I don't know if it was something crazy, but to save himself, he sends this woman out there for the very thing that he despised of the first time.
Yeah.
It's like, really? So now you're mad because what? She saved you, you used her to save you. And because maybe you felt disrespected by her the first time, it was okay for you to give her up the second time. And
So she got what she deserved, you're saying. Or in his mind, maybe. Yeah.
To save himself.
Okay. John?
Kind of along the same lines, I was thinking, it's not true love that sent him on to go get her in the first place, you know. She's wrong to me, and the right thing is, you know, this, and maybe he's already decided that she had played the harlot, and why not?
Yeah.
He already had bad thoughts about her.
Yeah. Again, everything is so twisted in this story that it doesn't surprise us. And the thing we have to keep reminding ourselves is we don't live in that day, and we should never, ever think anything like that is remotely justifiable. And so, as we said here, you know, if somebody came in, if I had a daughter and somebody came in to get her, it'd be over my dead body, because that's the only way they'd get in. And that's how we think, and that's the way you should think, obviously. But Israel is so far gone from their relationship with God that this probably doesn't seem as much out of place as you and I would think that it does, except, we get later in the chapter, we're going to find that Israel didn't respond real well to that. Elwin and then Bob.
Yeah, I think that the response that he made when he came out and saw her said something. He said, "Get up and let us get going." In other words, he wasn't planning on leaving her there. He was planning on taking her with him. Therefore, he was going to keep her. So no matter what the situation was, at least he said, "Come on, let's go.
Yeah.
We got to go."
Yeah, Bob?
The way I'm viewing this thing, the most righteous person in this entire story is the homeowner. And he's not fantastic.
No. No. Yeah, yeah. You got righteousness, you got the homeowner, and then you got the rest of them down here somewhere.
Yeah. If you want a story about just how bad things are in the day, even the best one of the story is not necessarily a winner.
Yeah, the best one in the story is not a winner. That's a good way to look at this particular circumstance. But there was no answer. So the man lifted her onto the donkey, and the man got up and went to his place. So, again, here's how I picture that. In the old Westerns, when the guy got killed, they strapped him across the saddle of his horse, and that's what I picture here. He just threw her body across the donkey and took her home. And again, this is what happens when people quit following God. And you say, well, that could never happen today. Yeah, it could. Yeah, it could. Here's where it gets even uglier. When he entered his house, he took a knife, laid hold of his concubine, divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, no such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, confirm, and speak up. Wow. That's how bad this is. Again, remember that all these people that he sent the body parts to are part of that same Israel that all this is happening in. And they're saying, we haven't ever seen anything like this before. And the next phrase there, consider it, confirm, speak up. What are they saying? We got to talk about it. We got to do something about this. And so, again, the back and forth in these narratives that we're reading, something terrible happens, and they decide we got to do something about that. So there's still, on some level, somewhere, God's moral level's up here, and somewhere down below that, there is a moral level that they haven't sunken below. And to think that the thing that finally rouses them to action is receiving a body part from a concubine with the story of what happened. That's what it took to get their attention, it seems like. Finally, we need to do something about that. Diana?
Why do you think he did that? Instead of giving her the proper burial, why did he make them for
There are places in the Old Testament where they would cut up an animal and send it out as a call to arms or whatever. And I'm guessing, being that he was a Levite, maybe that's why he did it. I'm just guessing here, I don't know. That he cut her up because that was the offense. Here's the story. You want proof of it? Here's her left arm or whatever to do that. So I'm guessing that would be maybe the reason, but I don't know. Redempta? Yeah. Yeah, he cut them up 12 pieces, sent to the 12 tribes because everybody needs to get involved with this and deal with this. And so, again, let's quit there because there's a whole bunch to talk about there and from the rest of the chapter forward. Janelle?
Generally, when you get to some state of living on, or just some state of disorder, it takes something shocking to get you to say, oh, we got to look at this. We got to do this. So that's kind of the way I would say, as gross as it is, it was shocking to everyone.
Sure.
And the considering.
Yeah, something they hadn't seen before, so it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Bill?
Did Benjamin get a piece?
Okay, did Benjamin? It just says there he divided her in 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent it throughout the territory. So I would assume so. Which I can wonder what Benjamin's response was. Anyway, don't think about this week. Think about something else, and we'll pick up here, Lord willing, next Sunday morning.
A little bit more pleasant.